Okay, so thank you all again for taking the time today. I'm so grateful for your generosity with your experience and time today in service of teachers all over the city. I'd like to start with an introduction. If you wouldn't mind, let us know your name, where you work, or about your work, and then what brings you to this conversation today. What are you hoping to learn and share? We can start with you, Matthias. That's all right.
Sure. My name is Matthias McNeal. I'm a high school teacher at Valor Collegiate Academy. Teach personal finance. And I'm super excited about collaborating with, I think, fellow educators and administrators as it relates to some of the things that not only have are most pressing in having conversations about within the classroom, but also kind of affect our world currently and has always affected us. And I'm looking forward to these conversations. I hope it's lively. I hope it's super organic, and I'm really looking forward to engaging over this next hour.
Thank you very much. Johonna, would you like to introduce yourself? And Ricky will say you're on deck. I'll try to stop surprising everybody.
I'm Johonna Garrett, and I am a second grade teacher at Warner Arts Magnet. And I've been an elementary school teacher this will be my 16th year as a teacher. And Ricky, I've worked closely with Ricky with our Be Well program and mindfulness. And she asked, if I would participate in the panel, and I was pretty excited about it because I was pretty excited about Be Well and our students being exposed to mindfulness. And so I hope to be able to share my expertise in elementary school ed and also experiencing this new concept of children being mindful about, themselves, and their behavior and just being aware. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you. And we are too. That's great. Ricky, you are up, and then Scott, you are on deck, please.
Hey everybody, I'm Ricky Ratner, and I'm gonna call her Miss Garrett because it's weird when you switch those lines. You're like, I can't. But I started my career as a fourth grade teacher at Robert Churchwell Elementary School. I started using mindfulness and movement yoga in my classroom. And then that propelled me to launch Be Well in school, which we are piloting at Warner currently. We did it this past year, and that's how I got to know Miss Garrett. And I'm just excited to share what we learned through this year of piloting this work at Warner and the phenomenal results we saw in such a short amount of time. And I think, especially with everything going on in our world right now, these tools and talking about trauma and social emotional needs and mental health needs are so critical. And so I'm excited to engage in this dialogue and be collaborative and talk about how we move forward together.
Thank you, Ricky. Scott, you're up, and Kim, you are on deck.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Field. I'm one of the teachers at the new Templeton Academy. And currently in the high school there teaching history. Next year I'll be in the middle school. The bulk of my career, I've been in the classroom for over 20 years now, has been in middle school. The last stretch, last 8 years have been in a high school. And I'm actually a practicing Buddhist. So I took refuge over 10 years ago. And I practice at Padmasambhava Buddhist Center on Berry Hill, but also a lot on my own. And we actually implemented a school-wide mindfulness program at Crnobori where I used to teach. Did not succeed, did not take root. So I have some thoughts about that. I'd be really interested to hear how things are going at Warner, which is just down the road from where I live. I feel like, very humbly, I don't know what I'm bringing to the table other than my personal experience. As a practitioner, it's been really hard for me to translate it into what my kids are doing in classroom. So right now, I've kind of put it on the back burner, full disclosure, Greg, but I'm totally open to taking a second visit to implementing some mindfulness at a school, specifically the one I currently work at. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I feel like I have a lot to learn. So thanks.
Thank you, Scott. And also, I think that your previous creation of the teacher wellness program at Sewanee was a big part of the way in which you understood the dual layer of caring for students and caring for ourselves as we look to serve in that way. So I don't want to leave that part of it out as well. But it's true, no matter what we bring to the table, we still have a lot to learn. So Kim, you're up, please, and Mary, you're on deck.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kimberly Taylor. I work for Metro Public Schools, and I currently serve as a social emotional learning specialist. This year, we're moving to tiered level support, so I will be supporting all the high schools in our district. So this is new for me. This will be exciting. It's like starting a new job, but not really. I am probably a 20-year plus. I think this is year 22 for me working with Metro. My career started in exceptional education, and then I kind of evolved into leadership positions. I'm hoping today to kind of bring to the table just my collaborative spirit, just wanting to learn more from you guys and to hear, what you're sharing and what you're doing. I actually started my mindfulness journey about 6 years ago when I was Dean of Instruction at Napier Elementary. And we were just, looking for ways to help kids with that self-management, right? And so we started implementing a mindfulness moment daily at noon for every person in the building. Guests, administrators, everyone would just stop doing what they were doing for this mindfulness minute. And then it started, you could see the benefits of it, right? And then I had kids at dismissal asking, can we do a mindfulness moment now? And so I was like, it's something to this, right? And so then I started trying to learn for myself. And so I'm on a journey and I'm learning every day. It's a practice. And so I'm hoping that maybe you guys will share something with me that I can use as I continue on my practice. And maybe I can share something that you can use along your mindfulness journey as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Mary, if you mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm so grateful to be here with you all. So I'm Mary Cernibori. I'm the coordinator of trauma-informed schools for Metro Nashville Public Schools. And let's see, throughout my 20 years in education, I've been a teacher. My whole career's been primarily dedicated to working with and supporting kids with and at risk for emotional and behavioral challenges in the school setting. I've been embedded in research during my doctoral work, and then in a consultant role as a board certified behavior analyst, serving about a dozen schools in Metro Nashville. And then for the last 5 or so years, I've been in my current position, really leading systems change and a system-wide model of bringing trauma-informed school practices to the district, as well as school-wide models for this work. And I think that my biggest excitement about being together with this panel today is really digging deep into exploring the intersection between trauma-informed school practices, particularly digging into the trauma of racism that is so deeply impacting our kids in our society today, as well as the intersection, of course, mindfulness, culturally responsive teaching, and equity-driven approaches. Probably most importantly, teacher wellness and these notions and ability to actually pull off both collective care as well as individual self-care.
I'm looking forward to all that as well. It's we have a lot of ground to cover. we'll just get started. I guess for the purposes of an ease of conversation, perhaps if we can just double check our mics are muted if we're not speaking, and then we'll it would probably be best to indicate that you'd like to speak next with a physical hand in the air. Sometimes it's hard to see the little hand on Zoom that goes up. I shared the questions and topics that our teachers are most curious about, and they did cover quite a span of not only kind of lenses through which we can see this work, but then also really granular stuff. What time is the best time of day to do mindfulness, or what are you allowed to do to get started, all the way to the larger systemic equity issues in mindfulness, and how mindfulness implemented different ways can have unintended consequences. Was there anything that stood out that anyone would like to get started on in particular? Like they read it and said, "Oh, I can't wait to start digging in at that. That's where we want to go."
I'll start. So as someone who does trauma work for a living, and also Scott, you mentioned that you have a personal practice. I too have a personal practice about 10 years in. Kimberly, you as well. I think many of us do. But doing trauma work and also having a mindfulness practice myself, I'm deeply sensitive to the way mindfulness needs to look in the classroom or in the school setting, and being incredibly cautious to not provoke more, intense feelings that the context does not support, right? To bring stuff up in kids and then have them in a place that doesn't support that processing. So I think that something that came up in one of the readings that you shared with the group that really stood out to me is that we really should not be implementing mindfulness unless we're already in a context that supports belongingness and acceptance, that supports student voice. And there's already a community built based on culturally responsive understanding and pedagogy. And I just think that is such an important theme, that we can't just put mindfulness in if we don't already have a well-established support system, given our students' needs and what they bring to the table.
And I totally agree. Just experiencing mindfulness, at Warner. First of all, that was my first experience ever in my career having anything dealing with mindfulness, meditation, yoga, anything. And I had to really check myself while we were going through this process, because, I was taught by old school African-American teachers, hey, you sit down, you listen, very firm. And I've modeled myself in that same way. And going into using mindfulness as a way for students to understand themselves and manage their behaviors, I had to eliminate some of the ways that, I thought that behavior should be managed. And so I had to have complete buy-in. Now I'm not, it's not that I haven't, used meditation or yoga or anything like that, but, to implement that fully, I had to have complete buy-in that would work. And, telling a child to, get to work, regardless of, what's going on with them, that doesn't work anymore. I need to acknowledge that you feel a certain way, and then use all the tools that we were taught through Ricky, giving us PDs, and going to those tools and that toolbox to say, okay, you might need a moment. Go ahead and get out your Be Well journal and kind of write down your feelings while I'm still, doing instruction. So I agree with Mary, like you really have to, it's not something you just, hey, go meditate. No, it's really a process, and you have to teach children how to do this and really model and have buy-in, because if you don't believe it, they know that you know, they won't believe it. You know, they won't believe it, they won't use it. So I totally agree. You can't just throw that in there. It is a process.
Hey, thank y'all for sharing. I believe that. Oh, go ahead. Not to jump in too heavy too early, but I think that speaks to a greater question or a greater road that we have to traverse in the course of implementing mindfulness and different things of that nature. Not only does your school has to understand, or your organization has to understand that you have to decide who you want to be, and it goes back to either we're going to teach to the whole child, or we're going to teach to the test. And in the course of you deciding who you're going to be, it determines how effective you implement some of these things. Because with that being said, if teachers are being tracked, or if teachers are being evaluated based on performances, or they're being evaluated based on some of the books that some of us have are in need of implementing, and I won't name them for various reasons, but if we are going to decide that our goal now is to teach to the whole child and to educate the whole child, then we first have to be in agreement of what it is that what is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? Because if not, then what happens is you're going to have discord amongst the ranks of individuals who may have a predetermined idea of what teaching looks like. And that predetermined idea could be data driven, or test driven, or for that matter, self-preservation as it relates to moving through the ranks of the hierarchy within administration. So those are some things, because in the course of you doing these things, it's going to cause you to break from the norm of what prototypical Euro teaching has been introduced to us within the last 10 years.
I'm going to jump in just for a split second, not to take away from someone else, but I think paired with that, it touches on something that Ms. Garrett, as well as Matthias just said. Are we control and compliance driven to teach to the test, or are we supporting of the whole child and all the thoughts and feelings and humanity that each child brings in our classroom? And we really do have to establish that first and foremost. What do we believe in? Do we just want control and compliance the way we were schooled or the way we were raised? Or are we going to be inclusive in supporting, you know, our kids' humanity?
So I'm going to just kind of clarify, well, piggybacking off of all of that, shout out to Dr. Gibbs, because without his leadership and the partnership that he and I had, Be Well would not have done what it did. Miss Garrett wouldn't have been as bought in as she was. And the same with this whole staff. When I first presented this idea, the conversation was, this starts with you. And thank you, Miss Garrett, for sharing how you had to be vulnerable in that process, and you had to check yourself. And this was, this is work. The work begins with us always. The adults, it starts with us. But Dr. Gibbs set the tone of the building of, this is the approach we're taking. This is how we're looking at our students. This is how we're engaging with our students. And then going back to what Mary said initially, there's a clear line in what I do with students. I am not the counselor. I am not a social worker. I'm not a therapist. So we're not always talking. We're not, mindfulness is not about, and movement and dealing with trauma is not always about talking. It's very much physiological. And that's why we move. That's why we breathe. That's why we meditate, and give that sense of time back to our students and give them tools to be comfortable in their skin. My puppy's being a little noisy, so I'm gonna stop there.
Hi, I just want to piggyback on what Ricky discussed, because I agree. I don't think that mindfulness is always just having students just, bring up things and just kind of discuss it. And so really what I think about when I think about it is kind of like the integration of academics and mindfulness together. So, you're going to start a story, a new series, right? you know, just kind of doing some, I guess, like guided imagery, showing the cover. Imagine yourself in this cover and kind of just, you know, kind of discuss that. Or like even mindful eating or mindful walking, those kind of things. Not so much, because I agree, we're not therapists, but I think just kind of having students, you know, identify what they're feeling inside, as far as maybe they have the wiggles or, you know, or some other, you know, they just need to move, but just having them and teaching them strategies to do that, so that they kind of handle exactly what they need, so that they can get focused back on the academic learning.
And I'll just, it sounds like what I'm hearing from the Warner experience and Matthias, maybe what's going to happen at your school. I'm not certain what's happening at yours, but I will say that when we tried it school-wide, we had a very popular leader, so a lot of respect, but it still didn't work. I think the point of departure was just well, why are we doing this? And that was never clearly articulated. I think we had a popular leader who, you know how things go in education, there's always a fad, right? Oh, this is cool, let's shiny, let's try it, implement it now. And so it just didn't take, because there was a lot of pushback from teachers who felt like, this is being put on me to do. I don't see the value of the tool. And so I'm not gonna do this. Also, I personally am not comfortable leading my classroom in some mindfulness practices. So I will say that it's, you know, at the end of the day, at the end of this cohort meeting, if nothing else, if you as an individual teacher are inspired to try mindfulness and develop your own practice, guess what? You're going to be really chill and calm in almost any circumstance in the classroom. You're going to start, I will say, again, full disclosure, I'm very weird on the inside now as a result of my practice. I'm just a weird person. And by weird, I mean, stuff will happen. I'll still feel all the emotional response to it. But there's a noticeable gap of awareness between all of that storm of thought stream and emotional turmoil and my own responsiveness. And so at least at the end of the day, I'm not further traumatizing my own students by my own responsiveness. I'm at least able to meet them in a way that's really good for them, I think, and healthy. And I will say, again, to just sort of emphasize, there is a really big difference between talking about mindfulness and just doing it and having that direct experience. A huge difference. And that's the convincement, at least it is for me. And so I would just encourage everybody to at least step into that for that personal experience. It's really positive, and it spreads. And it also creates that level of comfort if you want to lead your students in some practices.
I fully agree with you, Scott. It absolutely starts with the adult and our ability to regulate our own stress response 1000%. In the work that I do, I've found that sort of establishing buy-in comes through giving teachers the why and the neurobiological science of trauma that really we can just as effectively talk about as the neurobiology of stress. And today, in today's current world, with a global pandemic, with the civil unrest, the very justified civil unrest that comes from deeply historical unresolved grief, collectively, societally, individually. So we can really just sort of sell what we know to be effective for students, which is mindfulness, through the impacts of stress. So science, this converging body of multiple scientific disciplines, it is inarguable that stress impacts our and our students' ability to focus and pay attention. It affects their ability to learn. It affects their decision making. It affects their physical and mental health. It affects their relationship skills, whether they perceive threat in their environment that very well may be there, or sometimes might not even be there in the immediate environment, but there was greater threat out here that causes them to feel threatened right in the current moment, in the classroom. Their instinct to approach or avoid, or others to approach and avoid them, overall relationship skills, and their ability to achieve their hopes, dreams, and goals, as well as those that we have for them as educators to be successful in school. Stress impacts every aspect of the whole child and the scholar and learner, and mindfulness is a powerful antidote for all of that. And absolutely a critical element of mindfulness, and Kimberly can certainly speak to this because her training is mindfulness-based stress reduction, very secular, all about stress reduction. My Tibetan Buddhist background allows me to apply it in a super secular way, a similar way in the professional setting. But mindfulness teaches kids to modulate their stress response and to deal with all these things that come up internally. That being said, some of the sensitivities are that if we're continuing to re-traumatize, if there's still chronic, pervasive, complex trauma happening, for example, racism in our society or other things, we can't just teach them to regulate their stress response and say, good luck with that, and then keep traumatizing societally or otherwise. We have got to also allow for healing that can only come best through expression, acknowledging what's still happening, changing what's still happening, but allowing expression and student voice and the healing power of connection and relationships. I'm gonna stop there and pass the baton to Matthias because he put his hand up.
Thank you for acknowledging my hand. I wanted to speak to that too because I'm just trying to take notes as well, because I believe that's the one thing that you specifically, that in order for healing to take place, we first have to acknowledge and come to grips with what took place. And not to segue too fast, but I believe that kind of speaks to the institutional racism. I think one of the questions was institutional racism inside your classroom. I think that's something I kind of hit on earlier was there has to be, you have to know what it is that we're trying to accomplish and where we're trying to go. So one, search within myself. So even within our organizations, I mean, you got to get to the point, and we've seen it, whether through performative activism over the last week, or we've seen it through genuine self-reflecting. Individuals and corporations have released statements as relates to where they have missed the mark. And I believe that same practice, or that same space needs to be given inside of our educational systems as it relates to the biases we may have towards a particular group or a certain group, or not just that, even the mode or style of teaching that we're implementing inside our classrooms. I said it once before, like all professions have advanced. Like there's no way in the world a doctor would treat medicine like they did in the 1900s. You know, there's no way in the world a carpenter will practice carpentry like they did in the 1900s. However, the model of teaching teacher, I stand in the front, I give the information, I am the know all be all. That's never changed. And until we get to the point to where, you know, we start to address some of those things, and at the same time challenge our curriculums as it relates to, and not to be too deep, but if we're not going to address the imaging that some of our college students have seen as it relates to slave owners' names being on buildings, and if we're not going to address the cultural bias that takes place inside of our very diluted history classes, even to the point of the history behind the individuals who were on our money, different things like that. And then also, me as an educator, am I accepting that if there are 3 individuals talking, I immediately address the individual who is either a low performer within the group, or I address the individual that's a minority in the group before I address those other individuals. Those are some of the things that has to take place in order for you to get to a true understanding of what that child needs. That goes back to, I think somebody said, the work begins with us, and it does at any level, whether it relates to any of these topics that we're going to discuss. The work begins with us, the adults. The adults are the ones who have to set the example. And if not, then what happens is you're going to have a hodgepodge of individuals coming together trying to roll something out and becomes a soup sandwich. So that's where I am. But something that you brought up was, when you were talking, I think some of the things I wrote down, I made a note. You said we got to get below the surface, and I believe it's if not addressing from something that we see, or getting someone else to see, to acknowledge whatever triggers they may have. There were certain triggers that early in my education, when I was teaching, there were certain triggers that I had that were deep rooted because of me being an African American male and being marginalized my whole life, to where I had to come to grips with things like, if a kid just said yeah was a huge trigger for me. Yeah was like, that is the ultimate sign of disrespect. That is the ultimate sign of disrespect. So until I came to grips with that, until I acknowledged that, then what happens is now I'm on 10 because somebody said yeah. But again, we have to identify those triggers not only within ourselves, because if we don't do it within ourselves, you're never going to be able to see those things within a child who may be masking them for whatever reason.
So this makes me think of a conversation that I had with Mary a few weeks ago, coming around training teachers, but training teachers who are in the work of social emotional learning and mindfulness. You know, something I need to always think about is I am the walking stereotype. I'm a small white woman talking about yoga. Like, my kids are like, you don't look like me, and here you are talking to me about something like, I don't look like you. This is not something that I can do. You know, and so I started my teaching journey through Teach for America. And before that, I had everything negative to say about Teach for America. And then I went through it, and, you know, my journey started with a justice journey where I learned a lot about systemic racism, and I had to confront implicit bias and stereotypes, unconscious, conscious. It was hard work. And now, you know, I'm talking to a lot of my white friends right now about them beginning their journey that I went through Teach for America. And that was unique in my training as a teacher because of Teach for America. And then I stepped into a space where I was the only Teach for America teacher at Robert Churchwell, which I wanted to be there. I knew the community. I'd worked there a long time, but people had things to say about how I was trained. And then I realized that a lot of my counterparts, especially white older women, had no understanding of what they said and how it affected their kids. Every single day, I watched my colleagues traumatize their students and have no awareness of it. And they'd pop off because their kid reacted. And like, that's not okay. And we need to look at how we are training and preparing our teachers. The work begins with us, and why that isn't part of how we are training. I don't care if it is a mindfulness teacher or if it is a teacher teaching PE or history or science. Like, every single race is relevant all the time, especially for our young Black and brown kids. And if we as white teachers are not thinking about that, we are doing it wrong. And so I think like training and how we are having conversations within our staff is so important, because the work begins with us.
Just real quick, I love the story about yeah, and then the instinctive sort of response to that. And there's a way in which doing the practice, again, I'm going to use the word weird, but you start distancing yourself from that interaction. You're like, that's interesting. This person just said yeah to me. There's this like weird, I can't describe it. It's just like it's like a sports, a skill, right? And I'm going to go to the elbow. The elbow is, it moves in one direction. So there's like one way to use it. I kind of feel like the mind is the same way. There's like a way in which you can exercise it and build on its structure, the way it moves or works. And it's a skill. And if you develop that skill, as the school, we might wonder, like, should we be developing this skill in our students? My thought is absolutely, we should develop the skill of a real capacity to focus attention to some degree. We should develop the skill of awareness of body states. We should develop the skill of awareness of emotional states, and develop the skill of even labeling those emotions, even beginning with, oh, that's a positive emotion or that's a negative emotion. But those skills, it turns out, relate to and are relevant to academics, but also relationships. And our kids are gonna, life is relatively long, and they're with us for such a short period of time. Most of their lives are going to be spent in relationships with other human persons. So this is a very relevant skill to develop, and it applies in all kinds of circumstances. And I just feel, for me personally, it's been very, very positive. And I think, and I suspect very strongly, and I wonder if that's a way that schools can approach it. And I'm really curious to hear what other people think.
Hoping to take advantage of I think Miss Garrett and Miss Taylor have two different lenses at some of the same things, right? So from a systemic level, right, Kim, you're bringing these practices and these ideas system-wide, and I think, Miss Garrett, you're at a school saying at the classroom level, and I think many of our audience members are sitting in the classroom level, and they won't have their hands on a lever that allows them to control the circumstances. So as Matthias described, like, if we're doing this work in a setting in which the goal is compliance and like an ability to be still while we implement a hierarchy, that's not great, right? If we're doing this in a setting in which we're sincerely caring for the whole child, and if they get to the end of the year with a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of who they are as a person and what makes them feel whole and how to process independent of test scores, that might be a more productive whole person goal. But those systems don't always live within the locus of control of a teacher in the classroom. So as you look at the system, Kim, and as you look from the classroom, Johonna, like what levers do you see as like those levers are too risky to pull, or those levers are really hard and they require personal commitment and I can get there? What does that look like and feel like from your perspective? I'd love to hear, because you both are seeing the same place, but from different places.
Yeah. For me, again, it goes back to the personal practice. And I think Matthias said it, or Mary may have said it, it starts with the individual person, right? So you can't implement, systemically, like in your classroom, something that you really haven't experienced for yourself, right? And so, like, system-wide, my focus is getting the adults educated on mindfulness and their own personal practice before they can either implement it into like their classroom settings. Does that make sense? Like, start with yourself, find a practice that works for you, and then slowly try to, introduce because I think experience is the best teacher.
And in the classroom, well, one thing I had to let go of is my evaluation, and that, I really don't put a lot of weight in that. I mean, I know that it is supposed to show how well I teach, but my concern is how the children are able to learn. And to do that, for them to learn and be effective, they have to be emotionally okay. And sometimes academics is put on the back burner in my classroom for students to be able to be emotionally okay. And I'm okay with doing that. I mean, I'm okay with sacrificing my evaluation scores if that's the case, or, to make sure that they're fine. And so, but that's a personal, you know, that's a personal thing for me. But I know that my students can't be successful if they don't know how to manage the trauma that they deal with, because a lot of times I don't know what trauma they have, but I know it's something because they're trying to tell me something because they're acting out. So I don't know what that is, but if I can tell you, you know, calm down, take 3 deep breaths, do it with me, you know, and walk them through that, they're going to be more successful for it. You know, they're going to be better for that. And so next week, I'm not going to have that outburst. They're going to take those 3 deep breaths before I even say anything. And then they can come back and be involved and be engaged. So as teachers, we're managing trauma and we need tools to be able to do that. Now, we were very privileged to have, you know, Ricky and a principal who said, it's okay. Our students are able to say, you know, I need to go to the Be Well room. I need some time. And I don't stop them. Even if I'm in the middle of instruction, they get that hall pass, they go to see Ricky. They do an exercise, she does whatever, they come back, they sit down, they're back in the swing of things. But you have to have that, you know, those systems in place for, you know, it to work, you know, effectively. But as a teacher, their emotional well-being is more important to me than their academic, than academics, because they can't grasp it if they're not okay. So first, they got to be good here, and then they can learn.
So it's kind of struck me as we've been talking, since this is an organic conversation, that we haven't really defined for our audience what mindfulness is. And I think everyone could provide the definite working definition that they kind of go to. I'll take a stab at it. There's different ways we can define mindfulness, but it really, the most basic way, it refers to the ability to, or the practice of, being in the present moment, right here and now, exactly as it is, approaching what's going on in ourselves, in our environment, in others, and in our world with curiosity, kindness, and compassion. One of my favorite working sort of definitions of mindfulness is strengthening the mind. It refers to just strengthening the mind, and then something that Scott's touched on a couple times, ultimately what we're going for is achieving this gap between trigger or stimulus, whatever it is, and response. So instead of, you know, reflexively reacting in unsavory ways when we're triggered, instead we get triggered and we have that gap where we can experience what's going on inside ourselves when that student says, yeah, and it triggers us. And instead of reacting in a negative way, or our kids, we can choose how we respond because we have that gap of like self-observation. So then we can manage. I just think that's essential going forward. And then somewhat related, I just want to emphasize the importance of not waiting until the moment that our kids are triggered, or in my trauma-informed language, flipping their lids, or not wait until we're triggered to say, okay, take those 10 deep breaths. This has got to be done preventatively. We've got to regularly practice this skill ritualistically so that when the trigger comes, we have the capacity to do this. Yeah, whether inside the classroom as a class-wide, 5-minute practice, or outside the classroom in a regulation space such as a Be Well room. Hopefully that levels the playing field a little bit for a common understanding about what we're talking about here.
And you, by the way, will still feel those feelings. Like practicing mindfulness does not in any way reduce the emotional responsiveness that you have as a person. they're still all going to be there. I still get angry about stuff. I still find joy in things. Like all of those are still going to be there. And I think that's important to note. I think there's a way in which people sometimes misinterpret the work. They see the calm faces, the breathing, the closed eyes, and they're like, oh, you're just learning to disconnect. It's the opposite. You're learning to connect more. And I know what I'm saying sounds a little like it doesn't work logically, but trust me, it does.
Well, you're totally right. Like, helping my students understand that it's okay to feel like what you're feeling. It's a feeling, like it's okay to feel that. You're mad, you're angry. It's okay to feel that. We just have to change the way you respond to it. And giving them, acknowledging that they feel a certain way, and saying that, it's okay for you, to be mad, but if you can just stop for a minute, if you can focus on something in the room for a minute, just teach them, give them some tools to manage their feelings. And on an elementary level, well, really, I mean, especially like with high school kids, if they've never, acknowledged their feelings, you probably have to still do that on a basic level to show them. But younger kids, it's just allowing them to feel and letting them know it's okay, because sometimes they don't come from a place where anybody's acknowledging their feelings or acknowledging that, something's going on with them. So I think it is giving them permission, to feel, and it's okay to be mad. But it's not okay to hurt somebody because you're mad, or it's not okay, to harm somebody because, you're sad. So let's be mindful of our feelings and then learn how to, deal with those. And a lot of times kids don't have those tools because no one explicitly teaches them that, they just kind of, say, get over there, stop doing that, stop crying, stop throwing books. What else can I do though? And so mindfulness helps us, teach them that.
I loved all of that. I just like the little bit I would add is that mindfulness for me when I'm working with our young people is tools to be present in the now. And then once you're present, being able to observe without judgment. And, like Miss Garrett just said, I am mad and that's okay. Now, how do we move through that anger in a way that we want to, rather than just reacting without consciousness or intentionality? The tool that we used in Be Well and at Warner is breath, breathing. And there's an incredible video that I kept coming up in my mind as everybody was talking. I think everybody would just benefit and learn a lot from it if you want to learn more. But the polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve, and how we can actually give our students this tool to shift the nervous system. So in that, escalated lid flipped state, and using the breath, taking those 3, 6, however many deep breaths, focusing on that exhale, slowing everything in the body down, because when we're in this state of flipped, the lens through which we see the world, the lens through which our whole body is receiving stimulus is in a whole different state. So it's so powerful. I could go on and on. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll share the video and I hope everybody enjoys it.
I think we will be remiss if we continue to, and with all due respect, if we continue to make this thing warm and fuzzy. It's hard for me to take deep breaths when I've been called a nigger by a white counterpart. It's hard for a young lady who's had her hijab snatched off by a student to take the three breaths. It's hard for a Muslim student who's been called a terrorist. So I want to make sure that in the course of us, because we've all at least at one point been educators, and I believe we're speaking to future educators. We gotta make sure that if we're going to make sure that this next generation of teachers are prepared for whatever takes place in the classroom, it's remiss of us if we don't speak specifically to that this is a practice. However, to me, still to this day, and it was mentioned a couple of times, is a deep-rooted something in my DNA, that something takes place when I hear that. And to this day, it's still something that stings. It's, for instance, I'll share personally, my son was called a nigger in 5th grade. And that was the hardest conversation as a father for me to have, because what he told me was, he said, Dad, he said, I was called this, but I don't know what it means. He said, but for some reason, it just hurt me so bad. We talked about a couple of things came up as it relates to implementing systems of mindfulness and the gap it's okay to feel and acknowledge. But the worst thing in the world is for, and Ricky, I wanted to ask you this a while ago, it's the worst thing in the world is for us to get too cliche-ish with how we implement this mindfulness practice or mindfulness, or how we relate to students, not only just students of color, but it's any student. Because what has happened is, even in the course of me teaching and hearing this inside of the classrooms and inside the organizations that I've worked for, is we get to a point of using cliche words. Immediately when we're in a situation where we're trying to address a student who may be going through or exemplifying or displaying some form of trauma, we immediately hit them with the cliche trigger words like, oh, I understand, or I acknowledge that, or it's no, you can't. The last thing I need to say to an individual, I still have my mother. The last thing I can say to an individual who's lost their mother is, I understand. I don't understand. There's no way I can understand. I can call my mother. You can't. So I think for us to make sure that we equip these new teachers or these new individuals with one understanding that there comes to a point, and I want to ask this specifically as it relates to the savior mentality that takes place sometimes in our classrooms. And Ricky, I want to ask you, in talking with your friends, like, how often does that come up? Because that I think that is something that takes place that I've seen where specifically I'll speak to specifically white teachers have an idea of being saviors as it relates to, or I'm saving this kid from this situation, or I am. So in the course of you having come, and for the entire panel as well, like how does that conversation come up? Does that topic come up, or how do you guys navigate those conversations?
Thank you for that question. I think, what I do is constant work. I don't know what I know that I will never understand what my Black and brown students experience, especially my students who are living in poverty. That's not my background, and I will never fully empathize and be able to understand what that experience is like. And that white savior complex is something I have to check all the time. That's not, I'm not saving. I see my role as empowering my students with tools. Like you said, when something's really wrong and hurts you to your core, breathing is not gonna make that okay. What breathing will do is affect your nervous system, even if it's the smallest degree. And so if I can give my students, if I can teach them something that I had easier access to because I was white and I had $20 and I felt safe stepping into a yoga studio. If I can bring that into schools and make it something that we're teaching proactively, so that in those moments when something that's not okay and wrong happens to my students, it will happen. I know that. Our world is not just, they have a toolbox that is gonna make them safer and more intentional and less reactive in that situation. And they might have to do something that's not safe, but they're gonna make a better choice than they would have had they not had this toolbox.
I'm going to be really quick here, but I think something that's really powerful to avoid that, white savior type of behavior is kind of the distinction between empathy and sympathy. I can't understand, I haven't walked in your shoes, but man, I have experienced human pain and suffering, and I care how you feel. I see how you feel, and I care how you feel. But the more important thing is let go of the need to fix. We can't always fix it for them. Yes, absolutely, we can and need to create spaces where healing can occur. For example, the racial trauma 400 years into this society, deeply entrenched. We have never created a space for healing that historically unresolved, like egregious occurrence. And because there's never been a platform for healing, we are here, right? So I think that we can create spaces for healing, but it's got to be based on what do you need? I can't know what you need. So really asking kids, like, I see that you're in pain. I see that you're suffering. I connect to that suffering. I care about that suffering. I got your back. What do you need? Because I've never walked that walk. I don't know. And I'm not going to impose that on you. So I recommend to teachers a lot, ask kids, what do you need or how can I help? Don't assume you know what they need or you know how to help. Ask them. And I think sometimes that can protect against the implicit or explicit accident of becoming a white savior.
And I just wanted to add to that. I know these are newer teachers, but when I think about, some of these topics, I think maybe just to be able to create a space in your classroom that is like a culture of openness. We have to start having these difficult conversations. And sometimes if you start with the text, because it's not just a Black and white issue. We have the LGBTQ plus community, we have Muslims, we have all types of diverse learners who we're working with. And until we educate ourselves and start having those conversations in a safe environment and just creating that space so that kids feel free to express their thoughts, their feelings, their biases without being, traumatizing to other people, I think unless we do that, this is always going to be the conversation, right? And so I think about what's happening in society right now, and we must start having those conversations.
And just to kind of respond to Matthias, like I was hearing you, and when we first started this mindful thing, I was thinking to myself, this is not going to work. I mean, how effective, could it be? Because, I've worked with students that have experienced trauma, that, that have explosive behaviors. And, I just couldn't wrap my head around, if a kid is called a nigga, how are you going to breathe? Like your first, whatever your first response is, to punch, to, I was thinking the same thing, like, how is this going to work? But I saw it for myself when these babies had something else to go to besides, flipping a desk, that I saw them, stand there and just ball their fists up and just clench and then breathe. And you could see them de-escalate before I could help them de-escalate. Like, I saw them transition from being explosive to being mindful and saying, let me just calm down first. And I saw it for myself, and once I saw it, and once I saw students start to change, and just to be able to be aware of their feelings, it totally changed my my outlook on giving kids tools or giving people tools to go to before reacting. And it was amazing. I just, but you gotta have buy-in. You have to have people that, want to try, because it's not easy. But when I saw them have something else, it it just really made me a believer in this whole concept of children being mindful of themselves and their emotions.
What was the time frame? How long did it take for kids to start responding in this way?
And for the students that I have, within, say, like mid-semester, you could just see students being kinder, students, not so many like behavior referrals, but just in my classroom, just students being mindful of themselves and how what they do affects other students. And you would see them, oh, I need to, oh, it's your turn. Oh, I'm sorry that made you upset. I didn't mean to make you upset. Before, they didn't care. They didn't care. But they were mindful of how I affect other people, and what I can do to control and manage myself. I mean, they were just so more self-aware.
And just real quick, how often were you practicing with your students? Was it daily, and like duration, and describe that a little bit?
I would say daily, because before we would start our second half of the day, we would do a mindfulness activity, and I would let a what is it called? It's not Calm, but it was on Go Noodle, and it was a meditation, and they would do a meditation before we would go into our next half. We also had our Be Well journals, and they would reflect in the morning on what they're thankful for. What am I today? How am I feeling today? Or what am I proud of today? And so we would do reflection each day, and I would do it at least their Be Well journal 3 days a week. And on Friday, they could kind of write, whatever they wanted to write. But for 2 days, there would be like a prompt for them to kind of help them to start thinking. And some kids really got into it, and some of them, didn't. But I had students that I didn't think that I would be able to manage. And I always had kids who were hard, to manage. And I had some students that have dealt with things and had behaviors that I've never experienced, as a teacher. But implementing, those tools, that gave them something. I gave them, what I knew, but mindfulness and breathing gave them something to go to, and they would use those tools. And you would just see them, it was a go-to. That's all I can tell you, that it really worked. It just gave them something else, to go to and say, I don't have to, I don't have to blow up anymore. And they felt better for it. Like, they felt good, about it. Like, I don't have to always be so, tense. I have something else I can do to kind of bring that down. Because when they came to school, it wasn't always, they weren't always happy. But when they came to school, they knew that was a space that I could, breathe and not look funny. And somebody talk about me because I'm trying to, breathe and close my eyes. They knew that was a, place that I could do that and feel comfortable doing that. And I wasn't a punk for doing that, or, I wasn't, trying to be something, that I'm not. But complete buy-in from leadership. Our principal really pushed that as a way to manage behavior. And I'm a believer. Like, if I ever left Warner, I would always teach students how to, breathe. I would.
And I think that a real operative thing that's happening there when you give them those tools, so they have the breathing to go to, right? You're creating this space in the student that's empowering. They get to decide how they respond. It's not like control and compliance. We're saying you have to respond this way. We're just saying, hey, here's some tools to give you the space to reduce your stress, so then you're empowered to choose your response instead of at the whim of your stress to be reactive, right? And I think that Ricky used the word empowered. And if this work is not empowering, we're missing the mark. We're empowering kids to achieve the responses they want, to achieve their hopes, dreams, goals. We're not imposing that on them. We're just giving them the capacity and space to have more self-efficacy or autonomy to be empowered.
I just want to be hyper aware of our time. We're at a little after 11 here, and I don't want to stop this conversation where it feels like we're getting to some great ideas, but I don't want to take more of our morning than we've said. So perhaps we can say about 5 more minutes, and we'll wrap it up before I say we have to go. I think what I'm hearing also in this conversation, back to Matthias's point, like the context in which we do this is so essential. So if our goal is to get someone to be okay with being called awful, horrible names, we're doing this wrong. If our goal is to say that should infuriate you, and that should require you to want to change everything about why that just happened. My personal experience, I know my dad would tell me often, like, you're right, but no one can hear the way in which you're right through all the crazy. You're loud, you're unprofessional, it's unkind, and you lose temper too often. So you need to work on just making that part of your message clearer, because we can't hear you through all the crazy, right? And it's not to call that crazy. Whatever response a person has to being called such an awful name is what happens. That's how you feel. But if it's to get people to say, like, you should be okay with being called that name, then that's not right. That's a context that is inappropriate. But if it's to empower you to say, you're called that's going to feel awful, and you can sit with that, and then you can strategize, and you don't flip your lid. And then all of a sudden it becomes about the way in which you reacted. You were called that, you got mad, you flipped the desk, and now we got to deal with the desk. All the injustice and all that horror and that trauma is just swept under the rug, because now we got to deal with the reaction. And so that's where I'm hearing like that the importance of that context of we need to embolden and empower and name how important your feelings are. Let's work with those as skills, and let's work with those as things that we can get better at, which is different than we need to manage someone's response to fit within what we expect in a school setting. That's a misappropriation of kind of what we're thinking about when we think about sitting next to someone saying, I'm here with you, I care about you, and let's work together. And I think that's really, those are things that I'm hearing come up often. But I'm going to be quiet now, and I will probably in the chat box say that when we're about 2 minutes left, but let's say 5 more minutes, and I'll give us a 2-minute warning there. Thank you, guys.
I just wanted to clarify first, Scott, just pieces of our programming. So we begin and end the day with 2 minutes of mindfulness. It's guided breathing that Dr. Gibbs comes on the speaker and he reads for the whole school. And then there's that statement that, we have a daily statement they repeat every week. They're the same. So kids know, if I looked at a kid and then we were like, it's Friday, they'd be, I'm proud of myself for. And Miss Garrett takes it a little further, and she kind of has a system with her journals and when they come out. But to your point of where like teachers were frustrated and it felt like you're pushing another thing on me, that's not I was a classroom teacher. I know what it feels like to have another thing thrown on you that you're like, what is this? I need to fit it in my day. Like, no, we give teachers and students choice, because that's choice and healing is so important, or it's not going to happen. So Miss Garrett found her way of making this making Be Well part of her classroom community and going beyond what we just did as part of our, system. And then there's the Be Well room where students could self-refer, be referred by a teacher to come in and use that space for a 15 to 30-minute check-in. We also did whole group classes in that space. The goal was to do 4 a semester, and kind of I forget who asked the question. I think it might've been you, Scott, of when do we see things click? The research I did prior to our pilot program suggested that 4 sessions as a cohesive class has an impact on not only student retention of practices, so that proactive piece, we're teaching these tools when students are ready or feeling good, feeling safe, not when they're on 10. And Miss Garrett was one of the teachers who would always attend. And, you know, I saw that impact her classroom community and have her students grab on even more, because Miss Garrett's being vulnerable. She's here, she's showing up. She might fall out of the pose, but she tries again. I can try again, right? That modeling, us practicing and us being there is how it works. If it was just me and not Miss Garrett, it would not have been as strong for that classroom community. Yeah, I think that's all I was gonna add there. Hope that clarifies a little bit.
I can add my own personal experience. I tried teaching mindfulness for a solid year before having personal practice, and it was a disaster at every turn. And I didn't understand. I'm like, I'm reading every single thing it says in this card to read. I know how to read out loud, and no one's doing anything. This is either a sham, or like it just doesn't work for me. I guess I'm not trying hard enough. And it I don't know why it clicked, but it's like, well, I wouldn't teach grammar if I didn't understand what grammar is. And I wouldn't teach, you know, things I'm supposed to teach if I didn't have a solid understanding of that content. And so only then going back to revisit it and saying, oh, wait a second, what am I asking them to feel like? Of course they didn't believe me. I didn't believe me. So they know this is heavy stuff. And so that really required a lot of personal investment in that practice. That's how I got started.
I'll speak to that as well. As it relates to full transparency, guys, this is the first time I've ever used the word mindfulness as many times over the years of me teaching. I think it goes back to interpersonal skills, just plain and simple, being able to read the room, being able to have understanding of nonverbal communication and verbal communication, being able to distinguish between cultural nonverbal and verbal communication. Being able to understand cultural language and cultural backgrounds. So I believe before you can, if you set yourself on a journey of, I am going to explore and implement mindfulness, I believe before you get there, there's a couple of steps you got to get before you get there. Now, first, it goes back to, are you aware and are you conscious of individuals within their own personal space? And another point I wanted to kind of hit on too is, as I was reading through some of the questions, some of them were like, hey, how do you do this in the classroom? How do you do this in the classroom? Do this in the classroom? Really quick, if any of us had an opportunity to either teach or attend a religiously affiliated school, one thing about a religiously affiliated school is there is some form of either scripture or surah or whatever it is attached to what your lesson is for the day. So if we're teaching this, and this is what this is how this ties back into who we are. I believe a low lift, a low hanging fruit approach to implementing some of these things into your classroom are, okay, so whatever I'm teaching today, how can I implement this piece into this content area? Know whether it's a research class, a writing class, computer science, no matter what it is, how can I implement? Because what happens, somebody said earlier, you got to go below the surface in order for us to get to a point to where you are aware of these individuals that are coming in and out of our doors, whether they're teachers, administrators, or students. You have to be aware of who they are. You have to acknowledge who they are. You have to get below the surface level salutations of, hey, how are you today? Fine. You know, we got to get below that, because then that is the only way any of these things, in my opinion, that is the only way any of these things that we're discussing are going to have deep-rooted impact, in which we will then start to see not only systemic changes or systematic changes, but we'll also see individual changes within not only the person, but the organization, and then within the system.
I mean, that was just a perfect way to end right there. You know, right? That's what we're going for. Systematic changes that come from the fruits of what we're doing in our individual classrooms and beings in the way we're individually touching our kids.
Well, I think you're right. I think that really does name every level that we need to be working on, which is, I don't think anyone signed up for this because we thought it'd be easy work, but it's really important that we recognize the work we're signing up to do. So I can't thank you enough for your time and attention and generosity today, and digging in and sharing personal stories and experiences and failures and successes and asking really hard questions. You're going to meet the teachers about who wrote these answers next week, next Wednesday. We'll have everybody in a breakout room, and you'll have a chance to dig in one-on-one with some of these topics as they ask and want to follow up. So I hope the rest of your days I hope you can spend some time outside. It's absolutely gorgeous out there. I'm so grateful for your time, and I cannot wait to see you in person, hopefully, whenever that might happen. But in the meantime, again, next week, thank you so much for your time today. Really grateful. Thank you. Farewell.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
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 I really enjoyed it, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
likewise. Thanks for letting me into your brain.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So grateful, Mary. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Greg.
It's great to see you as well. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.